Welcome to In Vivo Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Laylee, your leadership addict, and my guest today is Hassan Archer. He is the guy leaders call when something's off and no one wants to talk about it. And this is especially true with technology. He is amazing. With regards to change management, he has a background in both Microsoft product delivery and clinical psychology and change management. I mean, the triple threat, there he is. He doesn't just spot the problems, he fixes them for good. I've had the pleasure to work with them, and I actually had him speak to one of my classes that I taught in strategic management, and he talked about AI briefly, and it shook my students' minds. And so I made a note to myself that I need to have him on this podcast and talk to him about surviving the world of AI as far as leadership goes. How do we keep ourselves essential here? There's so many fears behind the world of AI. And so we're going to dive right in. We're going to go ahead and sit with Hassan, get his take, and really understand what can we do to survive and how to not look at AI as a threat and more like a partner. All right, here we go. I am so lucky to have Hassan in our podcast today to talk about adopting to AI. So thank you so much for coming, Hassan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell me more about what you do, what your role is?
Yeah. So my job is I have a consultancy where I walk into companies that are struggling to adapt to change. Specifically, my expertise is in technology-driven disruption. My background being at Microsoft and working for some startups after that as a software engineer. So that's where I help companies adapt to that change. And right now, with AI in the news every day, every corporation talking about it, that is kind of the topic, right? It's what does that mean for my team? What does that mean for me? What does it mean for my career? And that is highly disruptive, and that's where I come in.
Amazing. And that makes me so excited because I always love talking to individuals just like you in the world of AI. The craziness and the fear of AI has people on two sides. One, to partner up with AI, and the other one is to run away as fast as possible from AI. What are your feelings about these two audiences?
I think the truth is someplace in between. I think if you look at historical precedent where we've had other major transformations like the internet, um, there was disruption, there was change. Um, Ultimately, there were some, I think, obviously very positive developments that came out of that. But at this in the short term, it is very disruptive, and people do find their jobs threatened or changed, and they feel a sense of just being imbalanced because they just don't know what to expect. So I think that's kind of the phase that we're in right now. I don't think we quite know where this story ends. So as opposed to saying, oh, the internet's here and now you can have a pets.com and maybe you'll ship dog food to somebody, which inevitably did not work out. I don't think we know what's going to work long term. We don't really know what this means for people in the end game. But what I think we do know is that it's a transition and people need to understand it. They need to embrace it and they need to ask the questions and figure out what does this mean for me.
Exactly. And you're right, it's definitely a game that we can't really predict other than the predictable things that people are saying, which is really from fear-based approach. So it's best for us to move and feel the partnership a little bit more until we can sort out what's really happening in that world.
Exactly. And I think, when I talk to people who maybe are more early in their careers, not in the management chain or the strategic executives, my point with them is look at what you're doing. And then if you understand what AI capabilities are today, not for the future, but for today, how can that actually make your job easier? And if you look at, um, we're just, the chat bots are the thing, and you type something in a chat GPT or one of those tools and you get some information back. Well, that can save you a lot of time.
Hmm.
It's not going to replace you tomorrow, but that's going to save you a lot of time. And if you want to remain competitive in the workplace, you need to make that a tool. and you need to say, okay, I'm approaching this project or this job. How do I change how I approach it? So maybe before I would have said, oh, let me sit here for half an hour, and like work on an outline for a marketing proposal or for a project plan. Well, what if I just have Chat GPT or one of those systems just give me the outline up front, right? And just save me that time. It's a place to start. And that
Yeah.
alone saves you time. That alone, if you're doing it and somebody else isn't doing it, well, you're actually in a position of now, hey, I'm actually using AI in my job in a very easy way.
Yeah. And I like that we're pivoting because that's one of the questions that I had for you today. In a time when AI is changing, how work is getting done, what skills should professionals, and especially leaders, be focusing on to stay relevant and empowered in their workplace?
So I think you're going to see a trend to two things. One is, frankly, a devaluation of lower level rote work, right? So anything that just depends upon basic knowledge or basic memorization, I think is going to be de-emphasized in the future. I think what you'll see with these tools is it actually is supposed to free up the human brain to do more higher order thinking. So your chat GPT is not going to determine the strategic direction of your department. Right? You can type in all the pieces you want about here's the market, here's my company, here's my people, here's my threat. You can put all that in and it'll give you a recommendation. But at the end of the day, you have to make that decision, right? And your career will live or die by whether or not that succeeds. So I think as a great voice, as a place to start consideration, that's wonderful. And I think people should definitely be using that. But it's not going to replace, well, what do we really think is going to happen? Do we really want to bet everything on what ChatGPT said, or should it inform our consideration, take it as one voice among many, like an advisor, and say, now where should we actually take the company? Or again, if you're earlier in your career and you say, hey, ChatGPT, I have a major in X, Y, and Z. What should I potentially do for a job? It'll give you suggestions, but you have to decide for yourself because you have to walk it out. So again, I think it's a voice, it's an advisor, it's a collator of information so that you don't have to spend a lot of time doing multiple searches. But at the end of the day, you still have to make that strategic decision. So free up your mind, make the higher order decisions, the more strategic considerations, but use it as a helper.
Mm-hmm. And there is something you said where it's more of the higher thinking that we're going to be using for ourselves rather than, hey, let's put an outline together for a week and sort that out. How can we develop that higher thinking within ourselves?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Mhm.
Um, I like to say that I think everybody's capable of that. And it's just a matter of practice. And if you talk to some people who are very promising, uh, smart people early in their careers, even middle career, uh, common frustration I'll hear is that I just don't have time to really think about this and do the things I want to do because I'm just so busy, right? My company just keeps me busy, project after project after project, deliverable after deliverable. And it kind of gets in this position where I'm just doing, 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 and I'm not thinking. But thinking requires practice, right? If all of a sudden tomorrow they said, okay, hey, look, you got half a day to come up with what you think the company should do or how you should spend your time, a lot of people would just look around like, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Where do I start? They would just look completely confused. You have to actually practice this, like thinking about in your current job, what could be improved? How could things potentially work? Like remove the constriction that you have in your brain because of how you've done things in the past and just say, how could it be? I didn't have to worry about what would happen with my manager or the internal politics of the company or do I have the information I need or can I afford to buy it or get the education? What would you do? Just start with that, like just blank sheet of paper, what would you do? And start if you start with that, then you can start to practice just brainstorming, throwing ideas out there and then seeing what's possible and just open the idea of what's possible.
The brainstorming part is very great. And to your point, you can even use AI and say, hey, these are the things that I want to do in my career. This is the way that I want to think and think like a higher leader, which leads me to the prompt piece
Mm.
is really working well in the way that you formulate prompts. Would you agree with that? How important prompts could be with GPT?
Prompts have been, I feel like we're talking about an issue that's been for decades, but it really hasn't. But prompts, I think earlier on were definitely more important because you really had to think through the question to get the right response from the system. I think now the later versions of some of these tools are much more natural language supported. So it's not quite as important if you have the exact phrasing or terminology to get the answer that you want. It's still important. I mean, it's just as we're having a dialogue here, right? Words matter, but it's not on or off. Like I think it used to be where if you just put it in a prompt and it wasn't clear, you'd maybe get garbage back. So it's not quite as bad. There were people who had jobs as prompt engineers. I don't think that's going to necessarily carry forward to the future because these systems will get better at natural language and just knowing how humans naturally talk. So I think my advice for people is ask the question a few different ways. So whenever I type something into one of these tools, I try to give it enough context, right? So it's not just a yes or no question, but it's a, hey, given this, right? So maybe I am working for let's say, a finance company, a video game company, you know, refrigerated vegetable company. Given this situation and this department, what would you suggest a potential marketing strategy might be, or an approach to improving onboarding, or um, how should we deal with the advent of technology and disruptive AI into this field, right? What would
Mhm.
they suggest we could look at? So give it the context. It doesn't have the context that maybe humans would have from a conversation where we would kind of understand a little bit about, progressively getting to know somebody. So you have to give it that context. So give it that context, ask the question, and ask it a few different ways.
I love that. And now going into more of the human aspect of things, emotional intelligence is a very big factor in our success and what we do. What role does EQ play in surviving and thriving alongside of AI in the workplace? And how can we use that in a competitive edge?
So emotional intelligence, I think, comes in here in a few different ways. Um, the first thing I think people have to realize is that regardless of where your position is in the company hierarchy, your perspective is probably different from the perspective of other people at different levels. So what I mean by this is, let's say that you are entry level and you're concerned about Chat GPT destroying your job, and that you're going to be laid off because you just got out of school, the skills you have are relatively minimal in the workplace. Your concern is valid.
Mhm.
At the same time, the way that you express that concern, that you deal with that concern, must be met by the people that are your manager, right? They have certain requirements that they have to hit. And so they are probably going to be thinking things like, okay, well, how do I get the most out of my team to avoid doing layoffs? Because nobody wants to fire anybody, but they're in a difficult position because they don't control the strategy, but they're expected to enact it with their team. So that should you should consider that when you're thinking about how do I respond with my concerns about my career and my opportunities, right? How do you ask the question of your manager to say, hey, I know that ChatGPT is disrupting a lot of these industries. I see there's a lot of talk in the media about things being more difficult for entry level people. I want to start leveraging AI more in my job to be more valuable to get more done for you, right?
Mhm.
Have that conversation. That way you're seeking an answer to your immediate situation, but you're also speaking a language that they understand because that's what they're trying to figure out. How do I get my team to take advantage of this to be more efficient, more effective? So you're already bringing the problem in. You're saying, hey, let's just talk about it, right? The elephant's in the room. Here's what's happening. I'm on board. I'm just going to need to figure out working together with you how to make this work better, right? So that's kind of the first two levels. And I'd say from the manager to the executive level, well, at the executive level, they're all
Mhm.
concerned about being seen as a dinosaur. They're all concerned about what is this going to do to my company in the markets? What's it going to do? What's the board going to say at the next meeting where they come and say, AI is all over the place. Where's your strategy? What does this mean for your headcount? What does this mean for your talent pool? What does this mean for your recruiting? What does this mean for your positioning in the market? Right. And you see a lot of this now happening where you see CEOs coming on the news and talking about, oh, we're going to use AI in the future and we're going to don't need to hire these people anymore. We're going to cut headcount, right? And that's all positioning for the board, for investors. And so that's coming from a place of we got to get on top of this, right? There's a little bit of concern. I would say fear, but we all know CEOs, executives don't have fear, right? They're all fully actualized humans and don't experience such things. But if they did, and I say that facetiously because I've worked with quite a few, right? And they behind closed doors, they're all nervous about it. They're all nervous of what does it mean? How do I get ahead of this without alienating my workforce, but also speak a language of strength so that the board respects what I'm doing and I can keep this job. So if you're a middle manager and you're talking to your executive team and strategic teams, take into account what it is that they're dealing with, right? So what is your request? Is your request a different budget? Is it hiring different types of people? Is it more time to allow your team to adjust? Is it clear direction? Is it let's prioritize? I mean, there's all those discussions you need to have, but you need to understand that when you talk to somebody, where's their head at? What are they really dealing with right now? The buzzword AI is tossed around so much, but what does it actually mean for that company, for that department, for those people? And it's different. It's just not one size fits all.
I totally agree with that. Let's say I still have fears, right? And I'm still fearful about what's going to happen. How can I advocate for myself in my role when maybe automation threatens to minimize my contribution?
I would say you need to consider what your contribution is. Because if you, and I'm trying to pick an example here in my head of someone recently, but let's say that you're a programmer, right? Because that's kind of my background. And right now, all the talk is that these new tools are going to generate a third or half of the code for these companies. And you're like, hey, I'm a software engineer. I'm a mid-level software engineer. It's what I've done for 15 years. And 15 years, you need to look at that and decide, well, is my contribution the fact that I wrote 200 lines of code? That I finished this module, this interface? Or is my contribution more at the architectural level? I need to move up the stack, right? So then you need to start looking at, I need to now take what I've learned. My time is no longer spent on just writing subroutines. My time now is actually going to be spent on designing systems and saying, how do we connect these things in more efficient ways, right? It's looking at, for example, the data landscape of your entire company and saying, wow, our systems don't talk to each other. Well, maybe Chat GPT or something similar can help you, um, or Copilot rather for that would say maybe it can give you some code to do write an interface, but you have to decide which interfaces need to be connected. And that's Chat GPT is not going to tell you that right now. So you need to start thinking about how do I move away from just the programming as my key skill to the solutioning as my key skill. And that
Mhm.
is less of an emphasis on the actual the syntax of what you're writing and more on the problem that you're actually solving and start looking at bigger problems that you can solve. So I would just encourage everybody to say, okay, if that time again goes away, but they don't have to spend that time on those lower level tasks, now I can actually spend my time solving the problems and connecting dots that could not be connected before because we just didn't have the time. And that's where you should spend your time.
I think in so many ways it's very exciting because we're being asked, and universally speaking, to think more, to be deeper, to self-reflect, and to do those things much more than we have in the past. And in ways it's inspiring.
Absolutely. And I think but at the same time, it is disruptive, and I think we do need to be aware of that. We talk about emotional intelligence. This is very disruptive. People have built careers, they have built stability. They feel like when they show up at the office, I know what to expect, and then now this just throws a bit of a wrench into that plan. And if you look at historical changes of this magnitude, looking at the internet or looking at when people went from working on farms to working in factories or cars. I mean, all these major disruptions in society, it was very, very disruptive. They talk about I wouldn't want to be a buggy whip manufacturer when the car comes on the scene, because there's literally no market for buggy whips. No one's driving in buggies anymore. Well, that's very disruptive. But can you take what you've learned and your skills and apply them in a new way? That is the key. If you
Mhm.
can make that transition, then I think you have something that you can work with.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
My
And
pleasure.
hopefully we'll have you in for future ones too.
Love to.